Most people think companies fail because they make bad decisions, bad leadership, bad products, bad strategy. But sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes companies fail because they did everything right. They listened to their best customers, they improved their products, they invested in better technology, and still they lost. My name is Saman. You are watching BB Plus, my channel about business basics and more. These were not weak companies, they were industry leaders, and yet each of them missed the next big shift. So the question is, why do great companies miss the future? This puzzle bothered one researcher for years. His name was Clayton Christensen, and what he discovered was not just an answer. It was a pattern, a mechanism, something that repeats itself in almost every industry. Let's start with what he found. Christensen found something surprising. Most big companies don't fail because they ignore innovation. They fail because they focus on wrong kind. He called this idea disruptive innovation. A disruptive innovation doesn't start better. In fact, it usually starts worse. Lower performance, lower margins, less sophisticated, which is exactly why leading companies ignore it. Now, if it starts worse, why does it matter? Because of what happens over time, and to understand that, we need to look at how performance actually works. Here's something most companies don't notice until it is too late. Products keep getting better year after year, faster, more powerful, more features. But customers at some point stop needing all that extra performance. When that happens, a gap opens up, and that gap is where disruption begins. Companies improve their products year after year. This is called sustaining innovation. It's what successful companies are very good at. But here's the interesting part. Most customers don't need all that extra performance. At some point, products become better than what customers actually require. That creates space at the bottom of the market. And that's where disruption begins. A new technology appears. At first, it looks weak, cheaper, simpler, worse by traditional standards. So the leading companies ignore it. Not because they were careless, not because they missed technology, but because their best customers didn't want it. And in business, you follow your best customers. That is what made them vulnerable. But over time, that new technology improves slowly, quietly, until eventually it becomes good enough. And when that happens, the market shifts. So the disruption doesn't start at the top of the market. It starts at the bottom, in places the leaders have no reason to look. And it tends to enter through very specific doors. Christensen identified two entry points for disruption. The first targets customers who are already in the market but getting more than what they need. The second creates an entirely new market from scratch. Let's look at both. Low-end disruption starts with overserved customers. Customers who are paying for performance they don't need. New entrants offer something simpler and cheaper. The established companies ignore this market because the margins are small, but gradually the new product moves up market and eventually it replaces mainstream product. New market disruption is different. It creates a market that didn't exist before. People who couldn't use the old product suddenly can. Because the new version is simpler or cheaper or more convenient. At first, the market looks small, but over time, it grows into something huge. Two entry points, different shapes, but the same underlying logic. Start where the leaders are not watching. Christensen didn't just theorize this, he found an industry where it played out repeatedly over decades. The hard disk drive industry is one of the most studied examples in business history, and Christensen used it to show that disruption is not random. It follows a pattern and that pattern repeats. Over several decades, the technology kept shrinking. The first there were 14-inch drives used in mainframe computers. Then came 8-inch drives. The established companies ignored them, not because they were careless, but because their mainframe customers didn't want them. But those smaller drives were perfect for a new market, mini computers. Later the same thing happened again. 5 and quarter-inch drives appeared. Again the leaders ignored them. Again new companies entered. And eventually they took over the industry. This cycle repeated again and again, not because the leaders were incompetent, but because they were doing exactly what good companies do. They listened to their best customers. Same story, different decade, different technology. The pattern doesn't change because the pressure doesn't change. And that pressure has a name. Christensen called it the innovator's dilemma. Here's the part that makes this concept genuinely unsettling. The decisions that caused these companies to fail were not mistakes. If you run a successful company, you focus on your best customers. You invest in improving your core products. You pursue the highest margins. And they were the right to make them. But disruption doesn't start in your best markets. It starts in market your best customers don't care about. Low margins, weak technology. Exactly the kind of opportunity that successful companies are trained to ignore. Because ignoring it is the rational thing to do. That's the dilemma. The very decisions that make companies successful can also make them vulnerable. Not because of bad strategy, because of good strategy applied to the wrong threat. So, what does this mean for you? Disruption doesn't mean existing companies are stupid. It means innovation follows a pattern. If you only focus on your current customers, you may miss the next market. If you only measure performance the old way, you may miss the new technology. If you pursue higher margins, you may ignore the ideas that reshape your industry. Netflix didn't start by competing with Blockbuster's best customers. They started with people who found the late fee annoying. A small market, low margins, exactly the kind of opportunity Blockbuster was trained to ignore until it wasn't small anymore. The real challenge for leaders is not just building better products, it's learning to see where the future is starting when it still looks small. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you find it useful, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in another business video.